Earlier today, and you heard this announcement on News Radio 1370, President Obama announced his choice to replace Justice Antonin Scalia on the U.S. Supreme Court. The president says federal appellate judge Merrick Garland would bring a spirit of modesty, integrity, and even-handedness to our Supreme Court. Garland compared the nomination to his time with his family and explained the philosophy of what a judge's job is.
People must be confident that a judge's decisions are determined by the law and only the law. For a judge to be worthy of such trust, he or she must be faithful to the Constitution and to the statutes passed by the Congress. He or she must put aside his personal views or preferences and follow the law, not make it.
Merrick Garland is the chief judge with the Federal Appeals Court for the D.C. District for the D.C. Circuit. Republicans have said that they will not confirm any nominee made by President Obama. Here's Sean Spicer, communications director with the RNC.
I don't think it's about the person right now. It's about the precedent, and that's where I think we need to get. We can't get lost in the weeds and say, is this person acceptable? Is that person acceptable? It's not about the person. I think the Democrats made the precedent very clear when they were in charge, going back to 1992, that it's not about the person. It's about letting the American people have a voice in this and electing a president, a new president that they select to nominate that person.
Senate Judiciary Chairman and Chair Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa released a statement after the nomination today saying he would not consider a nominee until after the presidential election in November. Joining us right now is Byron Henry, a legal expert, a constitutional scholar, on Twitter at Byron K. Henry. And Byron, congratulations on your new gig in Dallas.
Thank you very much, Scott.
You've, I'm sure, been following this story. Can you tell us anything at all about Merrick Garland? Do we know much information about him?
Well, there's, the web is replete with information about Merrick Garland. I will tell you this, that the left is doing a good job of putting out the spin that he is a moderate, and simply put, there's really not a whole lot of evidence about that. I heard the quote from the GOP spokesperson with respect to him as a person, and I think the one thing that is accurate about Chief Judge Garland is he has impeccable credentials and is clearly qualified to serve as a Supreme Court justice. So I think that the issue of whether or not this is about the nominee himself, Judge Garland, is wrong. I mean, it should not be about the person of Judge Garland. He's a decent person and a good jurist. The issue is with both not just the president, but the balance of the court, which, as everyone knows, is teetering on a 4-4 split on a lot of major constitutional issues. So Judge Garland is certainly respected. He's a former Department of Justice official. He's the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit. He had good support from both sides of the aisle. Not great, and he wasn't confirmed unanimously, but he had good support. He's Harvard alum, graduated with honors from both, was editor of the Harvard Law Review. So he has great credentials. There's nothing not to like about him from a resume standpoint.
You know, what's kind of ironic is that a lot of liberals, a lot of Democrats are upset with the president over this nomination because he didn't nominate someone who might be a little younger and serve more time on the court than Merrick Garland might. Merrick Garland, I believe, is 63 years old. If they had, if the president had appointed somebody in their 40s or 50s, would have been a longer serving member of the court than Mr. Garland might. But also that he is not representative of a more diverse America. Perhaps they were looking for. There was another candidate who was an Indian American, perhaps an African American, perhaps another woman that would have made the court a little bit more diverse, even more so than the president's last two nominations. But otherwise, there's really no criticism of this guy's resume and credentials, as you said, to at least talk about him as the nominee.
Exactly, and the real key here is, I think, to look. There's two questions to ask here. One, about whether or not President Obama, after meeting with Majority Leader McConnell and Senator Grassley, took away from that meeting that the Republican caucus was absolutely serious about not considering a nominee this year, and basically nominated someone, as you said, was not an African American, was not an Asian American or an Indian American, was not a woman. Basically, those are young, up-and-coming, what some would consider liberal stars in the bench. And basically this nomination, if it dies on the vine as the Republicans have promised it will, then you're basically sacrificing some very young, up-and-coming stars on the Democratic judicial bench that could be nominated by a future Democratic president. So this is a safe pick. He has a good job. He's a little older. Like you said, he doesn't cut across any demographic groups. He's not a liberal icon that the Republicans can scream about. So I think this may just be a recognition that if he's confirmed, it's a good pick. But it's not his first pick, I would think, President Obama's. And I suspect this is more of a I don't think this nominee will be confirmed. The next president will have the opportunity to nominate one of these other younger, more liberal, progressive judges.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you that Merrick Garland could be somewhat of a sacrificial lamb put up there. If he happens to be appointed and confirmed, then so be it. He's not going to screw it up too badly, but he's not going to be the liberal that Democrats might have preferred President Obama nominee. But he's made a couple of liberal nominations already. A couple of liberal justices have already been confirmed to the court under the Obama administration. What happens from here, I think, is anybody's guess. It's something that I've gotten into debates with some of our listeners because I'm somewhat torn on it. I think the Senate should probably move forward with hearings. The American public has spoken about who they want leading our country twice in the last 7 years, and President Obama won. As president, it's part of his responsibility to make a nomination to the Supreme Court. The Senate, the Judiciary Committee, wouldn't necessarily need to confirm the appointment or confirm the nomination, but I think they should go through the motions, go through their job, and at least begin to hold hearings on this guy's merit as a potential Supreme Court justice. That's their job. That's the way the system is supposed to work.
Well, I understand your argument, but let me just turn it around just for a minute on you in this respect. The Republicans are not saying that there's a problem with Judge Garland as a nominee. They're saying we're not going to get into that because of the divisiveness, the balance of the court, and that it's so late in a presidential election season.
But it's really not. There's a full year left in the president's term. Is he supposed to just? I'll make this comment knowing the rhetorical answer. Is he just supposed to go off and play golf for the next year, which he'll do anyway? I know is the joke, but in all seriousness, I mean, there is a year left in his term. He's still got the ability and the responsibility to make the nomination. Again, the Senate doesn't necessarily have to confirm him, but I think they should at least consider Merrick Garland.
Well, and that's a good argument, especially from a political and a PR standpoint, that the Republicans could suffer politically by not holding any hearings. I believe they're kind of all in on this one. They've drawn the line in the sand. I don't believe they will back down on it, regardless of the nominee. But I understand the argument. But the flip side of that argument is the Senate has spoken on this nominee. The Senate has given the advice to President Obama through the majority leader and the Judiciary Committee chair that they will not hold hearings this year. So they've told Obama, I guess, in advance of his appointment what their advice is and that they're not going to give consent. So in that respect, hearings would be pointless because they basically given before the fact, given President Obama their advice and no consent to any nominee, whether or not that's a bad idea politically or whether or not there's some sort of argument that there's a duty to hold hearings. I think that's been discussed a bunch by many scholars that there's no constitutional duty to hold hearings. The Senate can give its advice and consent however it chooses. But I do understand the argument that, why not give the guy a hearing? The problem is if you give him a hearing and he's a well-liked fellow with a great resume, then what do? Do you vote him down?
Yeah, you vote. You hold the vote.
Position?
If he makes it out of the hearing, you hold the vote. Here's the issue I have is purely political because it will become a campaign issue against whoever the Republican nominee is. Plus, I also worry about these absolutes coming from the Senate Majority Leader and from Chuck Grassley, because the Senate, the Republican Senate, has not exactly been known to hold the line against President Obama. So when they make these absolute statements, we're not going to have hearings, we're not going to hold a vote, and if they cave in, then again the Senate Republicans look as weak and as feckless as they've been for the last few years.
Certainly, I agree. And let me just say, I'm not saying this isn't a big gamble. I mean, this is a huge gamble because in a lot of ways, first of all, a lot of conservatives and Republicans aren't going to be happy with a president or a nominee or a President Trump making a nomination. They're not going to be happy with a President Clinton making a nomination. This is a well-respected, older judge that is closer to the center than a lot of potential nominees, and it's a good argument that the Republicans should simply hold the hearings and confirm him because it's the best they're going to do, and that is why it's a huge gamble to not even hold hearings on this nominee. This may be the only chance to confirm a 63-year-old, relatively moderate compared to other potential nominees, respected jurist, in the next 8 years if there's a Democratic president for the next 8 years. So it's a huge gamble both politically and for the Supreme Court for the Republicans to take this tact. Seems like it's a gamble they're willing to take, that it's such a big risk and the court is in such a position right now in the country that they're just willing to take that risk politically if, as you say, they hold the line. If they don't, then it's a double loss. Number one, they drew the line, and secondly, they didn't hold the line.
Republicans lose the presidential election in November, which is entirely possible. There's no guarantee that Republicans will win the White House in November. The next president, I believe, will have the ability, in addition to the Scalia seat, to appoint at least another 1, 2, perhaps 3 justices during an 8-year administration, which could mean if Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders wins the White House, that the next 3 Supreme Court justices could be Eric Holder, Loretta Lynch, and Barack Obama.
Exactly. And I think with the Republican, and I'm going to try to get into their heads for just a minute here, and this is very difficult because there's so many, they're different Republicans, they have different ideas, but here's how I'm going to get into their head. They're saying that a Democratic nominee confirmed right now tips the balance of the court to the liberal side on so many issues that it's a loss 5-4, and there's no difference between a loss 5-4 and a loss 7-2 in a Democratic administration. That they're willing to take the chance that they're going to be able to get the presidency and appoint a justice to hold the 5-4 majority, because their view is confirming Garland guarantees 5-4 losses on all the big issues. If it guarantees losses on the big issues 5-4, then I understand why they're just going to say, okay, if President Hillary Clinton gets to nominate 3 more justices, then we're losing the big issue 7-2. But the bottom line is we think we can win the presidency, and therefore we're not going to give them 5-4 for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years until the next appointment. I think that could be part of the strategy.
It's a political gamble for sure, and we'll see how this plays out. And I'm sure there will be a lot of pressure politically and otherwise on the Senate to at least talk about Merrick Garland moving forward. Byron Henry, as always, we love having you on the show. On Twitter, Byron K. Henry. We will talk soon. It's 4:49.